Hey, it's Mr. Tupper, and welcome to Airspace Review. Today, we'll be going over stuff that's both applicable to the Part 107 commercial drone operator test and the FAA private pilot exam. Going to be going over airspace classification, markings, and a couple of examples, special use airspace, and breaking down sectional charts. Um, so, first off, there we go. Um, Here are all the classes of airspace that exist in the United States. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Golf. We do not have Foxtrot in the United States. And these are listed in order from most controlled to least controlled. So Alpha is the most tightly controlled, where you have to be on an instrument flight plan and talking to specific people. Um, uh, Bravo, a little bit less so, but that's on the ground in the airspace. It's still pretty much as tightly controlled as Alpha, except you don't have to be on an instrument flight plan. Class Charlie, working down Class Delta, which is the lowest level of commonly towered airports. You can sometimes see them in Class Echo, although it's not super common. And Class Golf is uncontrolled airspace. So Class Bravo is marked this way. In general, it's going to be shaped like an upside down wedding cake. So that little area in the center on the where it says SFC right here, that's a cone that goes all the way to the ground. There we go, laser pointer. There we go. That goes all the way to the ground. A lot of people say upside down wedding cake. I like that because it helps you visualize it, but its function is more like a funnel. You take aircraft from way up here who then come down, they pop through the top, and they descend like this, and then they land at the airport in the middle. The markings we'll get to in a little bit, but just be aware that it's solid blue lines with markings that look fractional. We'll go over how those are read shortly. Class Charlie is kind of like a baby Bravo, where and you'll sometimes get airline traffic here, or it might be a major hub for like FedEx or UPS or something like that. But these are slightly less controlled than Bravo. For example, Class Bravo airspace. If you want to fly an airplane into Class Bravo, you need an explicit clearance, whereas Class Charlie, you just need to establish two-way radio communication. And again, these are marked fractionally, but the markings are in magenta. So these Class Bravo and Charlie altitudes are marked based on the upper and lower limits of the airspace. So the number on the bottom of the fraction tells you where the bottom of that shelf is. The number on the top of that fraction tells you the top of that shelf. And sometimes you got to go digging a little bit to find these, especially in more complex airspace. But you'll find it in this way. So if we go back here, in this case, that SFC means that this center area goes all the way to the ground. This 21 means that the bottom of this shelf right here, this outer ring, goes from 2,100 MSL up to 4,800 MSL. And here are a couple of examples. Here are some that pretty much come right from sectional charts. Slightly less common one. You'll see this at Class Charlie airspace that exists underneath Class Bravos. So Chicago Midway, um, the San Francisco Oakland Airport. I can't remember which one specifically. Oakland Metropolitan. I think there we go. And that T means that the Class Charlie airspace goes from whatever the bottom is. So in this case, 2,100 up to that T means the bottom of the Class Bravo airspace that's on top of it. And sometimes this means it takes funny bites out of the Charlie. And the other thing to keep in mind is that when you have more controlled airspace, that can take bites out of less controlled airspace. So if you have a Delta with a Charlie right next to it, and that Charlie seems to those altitudes don't totally agree, the Charlie takes over and takes a bite out of that Delta. We'll see what that looks like shortly. So class Delta is marked with a segmented blue line with altitudes in these little boxes, and the boxes kind of match the segments. So in this case, so in pretty much all cases, delta is one solid cylinder, and it goes from from the ground up to 3,200 MSL. You'll never see a bottom of the airspace marking for class delta because it always goes all the way to the ground. In this case, 3,200, you just slap two zeros on the end. Ursa is kind of like somebody made a Class Charlie and then gave up. Um, but in this case, they offer the radar services that are available at Class Charlie airports, but they are not compulsory like they are at a Charlie. And you can treat them just like a Delta if you want, or you can treat them just like a Charlie if you want. The markings for the in the gray for the Tursa are marked just like Charlie or Bravo, and the markings for the Delta at the core, which is pretty much something you're always going to find, are in blue. Um, Class Echo is a little bit funny because in general, class golf exists at the surface in most places. That class golf will either extend up to 700 or 1200, depending on whether or not the class Echo punches down lower. Class Echo fills in most of the airspace above the United States. In general, Class Echo starts at 1,200 AGL unless you see one of these two markings. The segmented magenta over here, which looks kind of like a delta but the wrong color, means that the Class Echo goes all the way to the ground. The magenta veil, on the inside of the magenta veil, the Class Echo goes down to 700 AGL. On the outside, like out here, that would come down to 1,200 AGL. So here are a couple of real world examples from the state of Michigan. So Traverse City here is a classic Class Delta. It's got a cylinder, and actually it's got a little bump out here, but that dashed segmented blue, and that goes up to 3,100. Working up a little bit, we got a Tersa. Here's Saginaw, MBS International. Again, we've got a Class Delta core, and then we've got some Tersa around here. With that goes from 3,000 to 10,000, and then from 10,000 to the surface, you've got Tersa. Flint Bishop Class Charlie. We've got a core that goes all the way down to the surface, up to 4,800 MSL, and then this outer ring goes from 2,100 up to 4,800 MSL. And then, of course, an example of some Class Bravo. Here is Detroit Metropolitan. So now let's go take a look at some of this in the real world. There we go. And there it goes. So here's an example that you will see on the test. This is the Dallas-Fort Worth terminal area. And this is where some of the trickier questions come from. One that I remember specifically is this Hicks Airport right here. There we go. This Hicks Airport right here, they'll ask, what's the floor of the Class Bravo above the Hicks Airport? Now, if you're looking for yourself, there are a couple of places where you can find this answer. What most people tend to do is they'll kind of work down here and they'll go da 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 da. Oh, look, it's 3,000 because they see this 3,000 down here. But that's where you need to be careful. There's a wall right here that's kind of obscured by this little bit of writing. So you actually need to work your way up and you've got to find your way through the walls. It's kind of like a maze. So you got to find your way up through the walls. Da, 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 da. Hey, look, 4,000. But check that out. There's another wall right there. So that one's kind of tricky. So you got to find your way through this maze as well, all the way over to, hey, look, 4,000. So just keep an eye out because you kind of have to work through these mazes. What I'm going to do at this point is let's take a look at this in 3D. If we take a look, this is what the Dallas-Fort Worth Class Bravo terminal area looks like. So if I just hide the Bravo for a little bit, we have all these little deltas here. And you'll notice we've got some that are nice, lovely cylinders and some that are, well, interesting. Class Delta is generally shaped around the instrument approaches that are required for the airport. So in this case, for NFW, you can see we've got, looks like maybe a runway 1836 here that all the instrument approaches go into. So they want more controlled airspace along the approach path to these instrument approaches. But we've also got some other weird ones here. And you'll notice there's some little bites out of RBD here, some really strange ones. There's some little bites out of Addison here. Um, that is because on top of those deltas, here we have some class Bravo. Now, the interesting thing about the DFW class Bravo is that it's handling two major class Bravo Dallas airports. And again, you'll notice the Bravo, which is this big one, has this funnel shape where pilots come in and they land at the main airport. And you'll notice the areas that get smaller, that get lower, so these punch ins right here lead into runways very often. The other slightly funny thing about DFW is there are these little corners here that got clipped off. If we look at the original up here, we can see that 1,000 over, 10,000, 4,000. So this shelf goes from 4,000 up to 10,000. And this shelf in here goes from 4,000 to 11,000. So towards the inner core of this thing, the Bravo actually goes higher than it does on these little ears that got clipped off here. Another example is the San Francisco terminal area. This one is not quite as complete as the DFW, but this is another one of the tricky ones where we have Bravo, Charlie, and Delta in this whole area, all these complex controlled airspaces. We pull this up again. So this is that terminal area here. And we can see that this Oakland Metropolitan here, we have airspace that goes from 1,500 up to the bottom of the floor of the class Bravo. Same thing for both of these little areas in here. And also, the other thing to keep in mind is deltas also get the same sort of treatment. So this is under the 2,100 foot shelf. The Bravo and there we go, 1,500 foot shelf of the class Charlie here. So this little minus in the box here with that 1.5, that 1,500, means it goes up to but does not include 1,500 because the Charlie would overwrite it. So now, if we take a look at this from the side, we can see that Charlie looks kind of funky. It's kind of embedded in that Bravo. If I hide it, you can see there are a whole bunch of weird bites taken out of this Bravo, out of this Charlie, because the Bravo shelf comes in and takes a bite from a lower shelf right here and a higher shelf right here. It's really kind of strange and kind of interesting. Same thing happens to this Delta and this Charlie right here. So the biggest thing is you just got to pay attention and keep in mind what airspace takes bites out of what other airspace. And the key to getting questions about the airspace right on the test pretty much has to do entirely with just attention to detail and keeping an eye on the little things.